Welcome to the PIDE webinar. As always, it's a pleasure to have you here. Today, we are starting a new series. As you know, we like to do series on our webinars because, quite frankly, some of the topics are very difficult to deal with in one go. So we think it's important to have webinars, a series of webinars. So we're going to do a new series on aid, and I'm going to start that off. We'll have 3 webinars on aid, and those 3 webinars I'd like to start sharing with you. So let's see, we begin. Can everybody see the slide, or you can't see the slide? Even I can't see the slide. So I don't know what's gone wrong. Okay, we're going to begin our webinar on series of webinars on aid. And I think we should stay in English today because we might have some donors willing to attend or wanting to attend. At least I hope they do, because we really want a dialogue on this subject. It's a very important subject for us because we really try and open up new topics. And these topics are important for all of us to understand because they affect us. So we're going to talk about aid because aid plays a very large role in our policy. As you can see from your cartoon up there, which is from a local newspaper.
Sorry, sir. Sir, kindly share your screen, sir. We are unable. We are viewing your Zoom screen, sir.
Yeah, मेरे पास तो आ रहा है screen share. Okay, let me try again. चलें जी, let's see if we can try again. अभी नहीं आ रहा. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let me start sharing screen again. Okay. And if we do, अब देखें अब आ रहा है?
Yes, sir, अब आ रहा है.
ठीक है. Let's see. अब आ रहा है? Everybody can see it?
Yes, sir, we can see.
Lovely. Okay, great. So we begin with this cartoon from a local newspaper, which talks about how how Pakistan is running with loans in front, IMF at the back, and a very scraggy, rough landscape ahead. So this kind of sets the stage for our webinar. And as I said, this is the first in our series. I'd like everybody to keep their mics mute so that our speakers can talk first. And of course, we'll allow everybody to speak. We want everybody to have a chance to participate. Okay, we're going to have 3 roundtables, as I said. You've already got the flyer, and it tells you what we're going to discuss, the complexity and various things of policy of aid. And we're going to showcase to you 3 people who have written about this subject, 2 PhD theses, 1 book. So these are not things people who are just speaking. They're actually going to present their concrete research where they devoted years to studying this subject. So we got 3 people who've done dissertations and books on this. So this is going to be a very informed discussion, so please bear with us. And we've got our speakers today. I think we've got a great lineup. Fahim Jahangir, who still with PIDE, although he's trying to leave, but that's besides the point. He's one of us. He did his PhD thesis on this subject, and this is going to be his PhD thesis he's going to present. Then, of course, we've got Waqar Masood. Everybody knows him. He's the former Secretary of Finance, former Secretary of EAD, a very well-known economist, writes extensively. In fact, is engaged in writing a book today, and is also engaged with the government now in trying to develop something on subsidies and macro policy. So it's always good to hear Waqar. I think he'll have something very interesting and provocative to say. And he knows the aid business inside out because he's dealt with it from every direction in Pakistan. Then we've got Nasru Minillah Mia, head of the country program unit in the resident mission of the Asian Development Bank. So Nasru Minillah, welcome. Very glad to have you here. Well, let me also begin with another cartoon. Now, this is very interesting. This is from December 1948 or something. This is the early days of Pakistan. Not today, not today. Please bear in mind, this is from Pakistan Times, December 1950, as you can see. And it has Pakistan on crutches, who looks rather like Nazmuddin or Liaquat Ali or something. And somebody at the back from the window is saying, let's keep them like this because let's keep them addicted because they'll behave like children. And then they talk about $600,000 of US aid government that did this to Pakistan in the Truman program. So that sets the stage for us what we want to discuss. And this is, again, a reminder for us. These are the fund programs that Pakistan has had. So you can see we've been in a fund program most of our history, and which is why the first cartoon that I showed you that we are following, the IMF is driving us and we are going over a very rough, craggy landscape, goaded by donor loans. And this is the picture of a macroeconomics. Macroeconomic, very rough picture, very quick picture. Our long-term growth is declining, volatile and declining growth. And our investment is the lowest in South Asia, in fact, the lowest probably anywhere. And even Bangladesh, India, etc., everybody is ahead of us. And our investment is declining. So despite all this aid, we've had a PIDE series of roundtables, webinars. You can see we're very active. And these are the key messages we've got, that, hey, policy inconsistency, poor tax policy, poor policy development is one of the problems. Transactions costs are very high in this economy, hugely. People are saying, we talk to all kinds of people. And of course, even the states maintain that their HRM, human resource management and corporate governance, is very bad. But they say, what can we do? We can't develop. Market development is very bad. There's overregulation and lack of clarity in markets. Energy is a huge governance problem. Cities are a market as well as a governance problem. Information risk sharing mechanisms do not exist in this country. So these are major impediments in policy, and we have to think about those. Now, why are we taking up foreign policy? Very simple. It has a very extensive role in the country. People even feel that foreign policy is what makes policy. Foreign aid is what makes policy. Foreign aid is made by people who are not accountable. Donors are not accountable to anybody. They're not responsible. They don't take responsibility for what they do. When you look at their own evaluations, I've looked at many of their evaluations, as have many of you. Their own evaluations say that projects have failed, but nobody takes their evaluations into account here. So you've got a number of projects. But at the same time, they make a number of policies for us. For example, the BAPTA unbundling was done by donors. IPP was done by donors. NEPRA was done by donors. The law was written by them. CCP law was written by the donors. TARP did the tax policy for us for many years, and they're doing it again. Civil service reform program was done by donors, where they took a bunch of civil servants to Harvard. The public finance, the public finance law has been written by the donors recently. The debt law was written by the donors. SAP was created a number of donors, donor NGOs, which still run a large part of our policy. And the question that we ask always is, who controls our thought industry? Who speaks for the universities? I keep telling the HEC that, hey, if you don't need us, put us out of our misery. Let the donors do all the research for this country. So that is the backdrop for this discussion. And now with this backdrop, I will hand it over to Fahim Jahangir to present his PhD thesis. Fahim, take over, please. You got 20 minutes, Fahim, because we have to give Waqar a chance. He has to leave.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Nadeem and colleagues at PIDE, ladies and gentlemen, and our distinguished speakers, Dr. Waqar and Nasser. Let me just share my screen here so that we can start. Okay, can you see my?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, admin, if you can just remove me from the co-host so that I can, just concentrate on my presentation. Thank you. I'll be talking about, as Dr. Nadeem mentioned, that I'll be talking about the foreign aid to Pakistan, and instead of usual talk about the trends of foreign aid, how many aid was given to us, and how we used it, and what is the effectiveness of foreign aid, and things like that. In this session, we would actually try to understand the complexities and constraints involved in managing the foreign aid in Pakistan. And yeah, so if you look at the literature, the vast literature on foreign aid, there is an extensive research and analytical work which was done in the last 6 decades. And despite that, the contribution to development of foreign aid is still contested. It's still under debate whether aid is good or bad. And if you look at the literature, the evaluation of foreign aid outcomes, which is the aid effectiveness, that actually dominates the aid debate. What actually is not focused much is the practical working of the aid policy processes. That means that how aid decisions are managed and they are transformed into action. So today we will try to discuss those some of those constraints and complexities. I will be mainly just focusing on the 6 areas, 3 complexities and 3 constraints. I'll be talking about the aid industry, which is very massive. I'll talk about the complex aid delivery system and the multi-level aid policy processes. Then we will talk about the constraints in the context of Pakistan. We'll talk about the public policy and economic growth in Pakistan. We'll talk about the public sector capacity, the government's capacity, and how donors' technical assistance is helping us to tackle those challenges. And then there is a multiplicity or proliferation of aid suppliers, recipients, and activities. We'll talk about that under the constraints. So if you look at the aid industry, with steady evolution, if you see the aid delivery system has transformed considerably. Unlike 1970, when there were only like 14, 15 multilateral and bilateral donor agencies, today the partner organizations and budgets, they have grown enormously. There are huge number of development partners and actors today involved in the aid delivery system today. So if we look at this, can you please, may I request the host to kindly remove me from the co-host, because I'm continuously getting this, notifications here. Okay, Ji. If you look at the recent data from OECD credited reporting system, which is online, we see that there are 153 international donors, and there are 146 recipient countries in 2017 who were engaged in this aid industry. Kharas to 2010 actually calculated that there were 263 multilateral aid agencies and there were 56 bilateral aid agencies who were providing aid to a huge number of recipients, including the government, including the private sector, consultants, governments, think tanks, and so many. Moyo in 2010 said that there were like 500,000 people who were directly involved in the aid delivery system. So if we look at, why I'm getting this again. Sorry. Yeah, so if you look at the aid establishment in Pakistan, so what happens is in 2018, 2019, there are 34 bilateral donors, official bilateral donor agencies operating in Pakistan. There are 33 multilateral donors, including 21 UN agencies, and they were managing like more than 2,000 project activities in Pakistan. Over and above, there are around 100,000 to 150,000 active NGOs, civil society organizations, international NGOs, and research and development institutes who are getting funding from these bilateral donors and multilateral donors and other sources, and they are also active in this aid industry. On the part of the government, there are at the federal level, there are 38 divisions of 35 federal ministries. And at the 4 provinces, in the 4 provinces, there are 161 provincial departments, autonomous bodies, and institutes who are managing aid and who are actually involved in this engagement. Apart from these numbers, there are other actors also involved directly or indirectly in the management of aid. And these include the civil and military bureaucracy. There are a number of consultants, think tanks, contractors. There are pressure groups, political groups who really try to pursue and persuade their own agendas in academia and social and electronic media, to name a few. This is the diagram from the OECD DSC in which they actually landscape, the architecture of aid. These include the bilateral donors, multilateral donors, global programs, NGOs, both international and local NGOs. Then there are private commercial sector firms and banks and investors. So this is the aid delivery system, but usually if we went about the aid delivery system, the usually concept which is normally conceived is that it's a linear chain. For instance, the money is collected from the tax in the country, the rich governments in the West, in the North, they basically give money to the recipient government, the poor governments in the South, and they, through contractors, they execute the project or program, and the money or the benefits actually reaches to the poor beneficiaries there. This is true, but donor government, they do not only give money to the recipient government, but they actually channel their money through multilateral donors, international finance institutes, bilateral donor agencies, either it's their own agencies operating in the country, or they also pool money in other countries, missions and agencies too. They give money to the UN system, charities, private firms, INGOs, NGOs, private foundations, etc. So it's a linear chain, which is often conceived that how this is how aid actually works. This is right, but there is another concept of the aid policy network in which, on which I worked on my thesis. In that work, I actually mapped the aid policy network in Pakistan, and I came up with this very simple graph, a picture of a very complex aid policy network in Pakistan. If you see that there are mainly 9 group of actors who are involved in managing aid policy processes aid in Pakistan. These include the federal government, these include the provincial governments, then there are bilateral donors, Paris Club, there are bilateral donors, non-Paris Club, there are multilateral donors, and then there are external interest groups, which include international consultancy firms, international independent consultants, international NGOs, international research and development foundations. Then there is a very large group of domestic interest group here, if you see, and these include the local development partners, such as the local NGOs and civil society organizations. They also have NGO networks. There are also public-private entities. Politicians are also part of this domestic interest group. And then we have an independent group. They are not as independent actually, but I actually named them independent. And these include the farmer actors, the knowledge brokers, academia, think tanks, contractors, media, traders, exporters, long list of actors who are involved directly or indirectly in managing and influencing aid decisions in Pakistan. Then finally, there is a smaller group of international yet influential group of actors. These include the OECD and then the UN high-level forums and other organizations like that. The third complexity which we need to understand is that we usually look at foreign aid effectiveness or foreign, whenever we try to evaluate or whenever we try to assess the effectiveness or value of foreign aid in a country, we usually think of inputs and outputs only. We think there are aid policies, aid modalities. We think about there are resource commitments, the volume of aid, and we think about this much money was dispersed by this certain donor, and that was dispersed, and at the end we have completed certain project or program, and we have achieved a task, and the beneficiaries, the target group, received the benefits. Actually, this is not that simple. It's not that straight. What's actually happening in between input and output is this black box, this complex black box in which basically the actors who are involved and who are managing this aid, they are managing all these affairs on daily basis, on weekly basis, on monthly basis. And until and unless we don't explore this black box of the aid policy process, we will not be able to understand which project was successful and why and how, and at the same time, which projects were not successful, why and how. So for learning for everyone is that to explore this black box is the key to understand which projects were successful or unsuccessful. Having said that, there is also a complex network of actors involved, influencing decision making at all levels. So keeping that view also is very important to understand the complexity of the aid policy process. So if I just tell you at the administrative level, if someone from the EAD, they will tell you there are basically two types of management processes in the EAD. There is one loan management process and one is grant management process. And if you look at the loan management process, this process involves 6 phases, 22 to 25 stages, and around 150 to 162 steps involved to manage one project, which is based on foreign aid loan. So it's quite complex and quite lengthy, the loan management process. Similarly, only one phase is off in the grant management process that involves some 13 to 16 stages, 86 to 98 steps, and in 5 phases. I have presented this in the figure here. If you look, there is only one repayment is missing. The stage of step of repayment is missing in the grant management. Otherwise, all these stages include the negotiation, signing, recording, disbursements, repayment, and closing. And each stage step requires several steps and stages through which this process goes. So it's not that simple if we think that World Bank or Asian Development Bank or any is giving you money and you're using that money and you are building some project or something like that. It's quite tedious, it's quite lengthy, it's quite complex. Coming to the constraints, basically, if you look at that diagram, which I also use in several places, including my recent blog at PIDE's website, it's a GDP growth of Pakistan from 1950s to 2018. And on the top, there are political and military regime periods, which is showing. And then on in the bottom, there is some prominent events, political events or other events which happened in that time, and that actually influenced our decision making and management of economic and public policy in Pakistan. So if you look at that, it shows that Pakistan's history is characterized by political instability, multiple military coups, conflict with India, involvement with the others' war, natural disaster, and then we faced sanctions at multiple times, energy crisis, security hazard, terrorism challenges. All these actually undermined the continuation of development policies in Pakistan, which resulted in unsteady economic growth, short-lived economic booms, and external and internal conflicts. So that's a huge challenge, a constraint to so many things, including the management of foreign aid. Then comes this diagram in which I tried to show the GDP growth, and in the last 3 regimes of President General Musharraf and the People's Party's regime and PML regimes. At the bottom, look at the number of medium to long-term policies, plans, which we developed. Over the year, there have been a proliferation of policies. To date, we lack a comprehensive plan to improve the living standard of our people. And if you look at these programs, except the medium-term development framework, MTDF 2005 or 2010, other than that, no program completed its time period. they were either never implemented, they were either implemented half-heartedly, or they were just slashed by a new regime when they came in. And then if you look at that, there is also the the Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals. So today, actually, what's happening is that in the absence of the clear and comprehensive planning, we actually left space for donors to influence our decision making. Today, we have moved away from policy planning to project execution, and that's too donor funded. So that's another constraint I wanted to share with all of you, that it's not entirely the mistake or entirely this something to blame the donors. We actually left the space for donors to stay, to live, and to flourish. It's not entirely their mistake, or entirely they are the one to blame too. So this is another constraint. Then comes the public sector capacity and technical donors, technical assistance to Pakistan. If you look at the public sector capacity in Pakistan, there is a considerable shortage of technical skills in the public sector. My research, or my PhD research, shows that there is a severe shortage of research and project management skills. There is a considerable shortage of planning expertise, negotiation, and administrative skills. And there are also shortages of budgeting skills and IT expertise. Over and above, there is a shortage of specialists and professionals. The government is mainly run by the journalists, the civil servants. You will hardly find the specialist and professional, the technocrats. There is no technocrat cadre except for the economic cadre in the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Planning. Even they are just after evaluating the PC1s and conducting the CDWP meetings, and time and again they are engaging with the donors and publishing reports. We are underutilizing our specialists and technocrats in the government. And then, having said that, there is a underutilization of existing trained and experienced staff in the public sector. People with the right skills, people with the right expertise and qualifications are not placed on the right jobs. I have recently published a paper. PIDE published my paper last month, in which I actually wanted to assess and explore the benefits of foreign training in Pakistan. My main focus was to look at the short-term training benefits in Pakistan, and these reasons we come up with why the government, what are the reasons which undermine the benefits of foreign training in Pakistan. So if you look at the red bar below there, vast majority of respondents actually indicated that the placement of trained individual on non-specialized assignment is the biggest problem. It actually kills the idea when you train an officer. If you get an officer a degree from certain foreign university or place, and then you place him or her in somewhere where the qualification or the knowledge or the skills are completely irrelevant. So this is the biggest problem in the government. It's not like we completely lack people in the government who have no expertise or no qualification, but they are not placed rightly. Then there is a lack of long-term effect on the top bar, which is there. The short-term trainings are mainly, there are so many numbers, but they are mainly task-oriented. They are mainly designed to complete certain specific tasks for a project or a program. After that, use of that skill for a certain activity, that skill or a qualification is irrelevant anymore. And then there are other factors, including the flight risk. When we train a government officer, especially for the masters and PhDs, they actually don't find themselves comfortable, or they want to leave the government actually.
For 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Sir. The final point is that I'm trying to make is the multiplicity of aid. The presence of multiple actors and the aid proliferation imposes burden on the recipient government that undermines the capacity of the recipient government. This multiplicity actually result in transaction cost, duplication of project, weak donor and donor government coordination and visibility factor. These problems also increase with the multiplicity of aid. There is a sharp increase in the number of new projects. There is a drastic decrease in the average project size. There is a substantial increase in administrative cost, and there is a multiple foreign missions and delegations who are visiting Pakistan government offices and projects, consuming valuable time and energies of the government officer. I'll quickly just show two graphs here, and then I'll end my presentation here. I'm going to show you that the donors' activities in Pakistan by government and the private channel. I use this OECD data, and if you look at that, within each bar, the yellow part shows the disbursement of a certain donor to the private channel, and the blue part of the bar shows the disbursement of the to the government channel. If you look at Germany, for instance, in 2015, they had 170 project activities in Pakistan, and the average project disbursement size of their disbursement in that particular year was 0.61 million. Look at China on the left of that. They had 21 number of projects in Pakistan, and the average project disbursement size was 28 million. Now look at Sweden here. They had a very small amount of small volume of aid available, but they had 59 project activities, and the average disbursement size was 0.16 million, just 0.16 million. Look at United States on the far right. They had 437 project activities in Pakistan, mostly with the private sector, small amount with the government sector, and the average project disbursement size was the 0.53 million. The point which I'm trying to make here is that donors with a small amount of money, they actually want to be visible everywhere. They disperse money. They are not very much bothered about the outcomes. They actually want to keep their presence alive, and they want to like sprinkle, and they invest in so many projects and workshops, conferences, meetings, dinners, and etc. So this actually undermines the value and effectiveness of foreign aid in any country. This is the last graph which I want to show is that in 2015, these much donors actually visited Pakistan in 2015. Just look at the, if I tell you, there were like 487 donor missions who actually visited Pakistan in 2015. And if we calculate these missions, then we will come up with 2 donor missions each working day on average in Pakistan. So there were always a donor mission, 2 donor missions present in Pakistan on every working day in Pakistan in 2015. Look at this UN program in the purple side here. If you look at the volume of funds they give to Pakistan, it's small. It's quite small as compared to UK, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, Germany, France. But look at the number of donor missions they visiting Pakistan, 104. Look at Switzerland, 70 donor missions to Pakistan in 1 year. And the amount of aid must be in millions, very small. And when they come, they demand meetings with every high officials in Pakistan. The transaction costs are very high. They demand all the protocols. They demand all the meetings and things. So this all is actually creating the transaction cost, higher transaction costs in Pakistan. So with this, I think
you can. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fahim. I think you raised some very good points. Yes, it's a very large number of donors in the country now. I remember in Turkey, when Kamal Darwish was there, he actually banned donor missions because he felt he had no time to do any business with anybody else. So it's a huge, complex system, and we have no capacity to navigate that system. There's a number of contractors, number of players. You've done a very good job inventorying them. It's just beautiful. And the issue is What kind of influence do they have in the country? They collect all our data for free. They take all our data. They even do opinion polls. They even do voting polls here. Everything is done by them. So how do we manage them? Let's go to the master himself, Dr. Waqar Masood. Dr. Waqar Masood, who, as I said, has been in every economic senior position in this country and is probably one of our best economists, and inshallah is coming back into the government. Dr. Saab, please, your views on the subject.
नदीम भाई, सबसे पहला सवाल ये है कि अंग्रेजी में बोलना है या उर्दू भी चल सकती है?
अगर तो ये हमारे पास डोनर्स है तो फिर अंग्रेजी में ही बोले. आई थिंक डोनर्स पता नहीं है कि नहीं है. क्यों जी हैं? आई थिंक अंग्रेजी में रखे क्योंकि लेट्स द डोनर्स आल्सो. या देयर आर सम. तो प्लीज अंग्रेजी में जी.
ओके, यानी ये वाली कहानी तो अपनी जबान में ही ज्यादा अच्छी लगेगी ना यार.
पर अब हमने उनके साथ बात तो करनी है ना, तो क्या करें. ठीक है.
Well, very kind of you, Nadeem, and let me at the very outset congratulate Jahangir Saab. I think a fantastic presentation, really on a very dry topic. He has brought to fore some of the very important lessons that one can learn, and also identified, I mean, where do we stand at the moment? And the sentiment that he has expressed, the underlying sentiment, frankly, I cannot agree more with those sentiments. Having worked as Secretary Economic Affairs Division, the main interface of Pakistan, I mean, you know, I hate to say donors, I say development partners, to give respect to them also and to us as well. So in that capacity, and have done so twice, and then obviously as Finance Secretary also. So I've been very close to the process of foreign assistance, so to say. The word aid is a misnomer. Donor is a misnomer. All right. And, you know, even at the peak, when such matters kind of justified the use of this term, it was really more an effort to help domestic producers of the Paris Club countries, or as much as, or maybe if one looks very closely, the net transfers to the country were very, very limited. And even today, you see everywhere, the development partners is coming and promoting their own countrymen, especially DFID and UK, so on and so forth. So, I mean, the way I look at this topic, I would say that there are two very fundamental periods. The one that ended, so to say, with the demise of Paris Club, with the demise of the old system of Cold War, when Paris Club came into being, and after 1989, when all those things were frankly wrapped up, and in the name of so-called globalization, I mean, the capital moved freely across the world, and the sectors that were never thought to be in the private sector were promoted. So all infrastructure, from telecommunication down to power and gas and pipelines of all types, they were all handed over to the private sector. And the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, all these countries, effectively, all these agencies, they helped to remove bottlenecks that those they were inhibiting, which were inhibiting the flow of private capital in these sectors. So, uh, uh, when previously, until that time, in the framework of Paris Club, when every year you will go and take uh, a portfolio of your expectations or your desires for development partners assistance. So in that annual sojourn, they will all select their projects, and then a level of assistance will be committed, and disbursements will take place against those commitments over the years. So that framework was replaced by, also we ran into our own problems after that. We were essentially handed over to IMF, so to say. Prior to 1988, nobody knows or nobody heard that IMF was giving any assistance to Pakistan. It was the first SAP structural adjustment program, which brought a new type of assistance to Pakistan previously unknown, and the so-called notion of policy lending. And with it, others also started making policy loans, World Bank as well as the Asian Development Bank. And then that's the day when policy framework was handed over to these agencies. They started doing thinking for Pakistan, and we kept abdicating our own responsibility for such fundamental work, which is kind of raison d'etre for any country's existence. We handed it over to them. So since then, you see that you run into problems. Your external sector is your nemesis. You don't export enough. You don't make foreign exchange earnings enough to cover your imports, and then you don't have credit, and you do so in a way that your reserves start falling, and when reserves come down, then you're left with no choice but to run for another program, and then again sign off another set of policies that you will undertake in the name of creating an enabling environment so that private sector investment will come, and your reserves will build up. But all those things are so familiar to us. What are the consequences of those policies? Now this is at present, we have virtually no bilateral assistance of the type that used to come from Paris Club. And the only new thing that has happened is China, who is assisting us in fairly large amounts. And as you had seen that, I'm really impressed with that chart Jahangir Saab has shown, that the Chinese have 21 projects, and every single project is through the government. And look at what has happened. And this used to be a very, very difficult topic with US authorities. When this US aid was coming through this last program of Senator Kerry and Senator Berman, that thing, it was only 23% which was on the budget. Everything else was off budget. And they had made a point of doing so and not accepting us. And they will say, they will claim that we have pressure from Congress. We have to projectize every single aid. I said, we would say that, all right, we will projectize, but doesn't mean that you will make the projects. You will go and work with our people. Imagine, could Pakistan go to Britain or UK and end up? The other day, there was an ad that you can borrow up to 35 million rupees from UK aid for women entrepreneurs. And this is full half-page down or Business Recorder advertisement. Now, can we go and do this thing in another country? I don't think this is just impossible. Well, how can we allow this thing to happen? If somebody is coming and in the name of assistance, it has to come through the ultimate representatives of people. They cannot go and do work. And how have we allowed it to happen? So you look at UK and you look at DFID. I mean, they have tons of money and they're distributing it to their own friends. And Karandas, every damn thing under the sun, they're saying Karandas will do this survey or that census or will bring in those things. And this is happening. So I think this mode, although, I mean, it is nothing compared to the type of flows that had come previously, these are useless investments, comparative funds, entrepreneur funds, SME support, partners, what others. I mean, even they go and do some old GENCOs and do their efficiency analysis, etc. What the hell? Who are you to do all those things? Give the money to the federal government and it can work through its autonomous bodies as well as provinces to do requisite studies. Now, I think if I were to, Nadeem says it, and I totally agree with you that we have abdicated our fundamental role of doing thinking at our own, pre-committing for things. You know, I mean, very recently, I'm watching like this the power sector thing. If IMF, World Bank, and ADB are not there, what are we going to do about it? We do some thinking because they are asking us, and they say that, all right, if you don't do this thing, we will not, give you this support, and that support is so critical for you. Meaning, you need the program and you need the program resources. I mean, that is really something that we should be worried of. And look, everybody is responsible. I'm not isolating one government or another. It has become a national character. The national character is that we, at our own, have stopped thinking for ourselves and have lost the ability to, pre-commit to a course of action and then consistently work through that pre-commitment. That ability we kind of have lost. So even when it is not foreign assistance, as I have explained, and it is more really almost comparative, I mean, uh, largely our development partners are ADB, World Bank, IMF, and Islamic development to some extent. We are unable to discipline ourselves. We are unable to make commitments and stay with those. So those are, Nadeem Saab, are some of my observations that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Waqar Saab. Thank you very much. Coming from you, Dr. Waqar, this is extremely worrisome because, as I said, you've been on the negotiating side. You've, mashallah, led IMF missions. You've led many donor consultations. So yes, it is very worrisome that we do not have the capacity or the ability to deal with the donors, and the donors are really not even behaving in a responsible manner. So with that, let me come to Mr. Nasrullah, Dr. Nasrullah from the ADB. Dr. Saab, you are also a Pakistani, and you're also in the ADB office. So help us think it through. How are we going to gain some independence, and why will the donors not work with us to help us develop some local capacity and local policy? Why are we at odds with the donors? Why do the donors want to own everything? Why can't our universities do some research? Why does it have to be the ADB or the World Bank who want to do some research? Case in point, for example, let me give you this. I wrote a book called Looking Back, Pakistan in 2047. Done in 2017. The World Bank started the project after my book was published. In fact, they came to me and said, okay, we're going to do it. But then when it came to doing the project, they wanted to compete with my book. They did not even want to cite the book. They did not even want to talk to me about the book. They went to LUMS, held a conference, and even the LUMS people told them, hey, where's the author of the book? And they wouldn't call me. Why do the donors want to compete with us, Doctor? Please. Bataiye Nasrullah sir.
Assalamualaikum, sir.
Yeah.
And how much time do I have? I just wanted to ask this.
What do you like?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I have no claims to being economist. I think you may have read my profile wrong. I don't have a PhD. I'm probably the least qualified person to be here, and it's in fact quite daunting to be sitting next to Dr. virtually, and it's indeed a great honor. So my take on the subject is that I just take a very process view of things, and as we go, I'll just like to talk about a few things that I have just learned over a period of time, and I've been with the government, I've been with the corporate sector, and it's just a few dots that I have been able to connect. So I'll speak of that, and I may not be able to answer all of the questions. First, I would like to thank Dr. Waqar has given a very balanced view of how the situation is. So generally, I think the question we're discussing is why has the foreign aid not delivered on its promise? It's a multi-dimensional question or a subject, and that tends to be unpredictable, and no one can actually encompass whatever it entails. It sometimes means that you can take a linear thinking to understand it, but it's more than often it's very non-linear. So it's sometimes we have very simplistic assessments of things. So on some of the things, I think it's the vantage point that you have on this. And from a very process standpoint, what I would think is you have to somehow try and unpack and decomplexify the subject, and also some of the assumptions that we have around it. And Dr. Fahim used the word aid industry. I don't know why that word has been used. Industry somehow entails that there are profits to be made in it, which would not be true. And he also mentioned the black box of factors and circumstances that needs to be understood a little bit better, which is what I've also said, that you need to understand this a little bit more. So on some, it might be a public policy issue, and if you unpack the spectrum, there are different organizations, and I would call it development financing somewhere, and then it's maybe it's a movement of goods and services from one place to another, and then people different depending on where they are on the spectrum, they have different comparative advantages to understand things and to deliver things. For example, ADB obviously has a strong competitive advantage on the transport sector, and which is demonstrated and does not need any defending, so to say. So on that count, what is it that is driving this understanding? Is it, if you look at project design and delivery, it tends to be a story of individual brilliance at times, in many places, or simply a case of media jaundiceism, the way, it is being looked at many times. And social media chatter, of course, is not an indictment of anything, so to say. So you have, it's just a chatter in the public square and people are being judgmental over it. So that's not evaluation. So independently, if there is an evaluation of programs, you yourself have written a book. It's a very, very nice, imaginative book. I'm referring to Dr. Nadeem's book. And it's very imaginative, and it talks about, what comes first, whether it is development or is it reform. So the objective is to for any financing relationship, assumes a certain level of responsibility to demand on the client side. So as Dr. Waqar Masood said, it's no longer the kind of relationship that it used to be decades ago. So once you're assuming, you have a trajectory, so to say, for going from point X to point Z, you are assuming that you're looking for, there will be a resource requirement. Then you're assuming, or there has to be capability or capacity, and then there is a direction, and then last direction means you purpose behind the whole thing, behind the whole journey, and then there is a reflection and planning that comes after it. So that's the journey that is assumed. And then resources, if you see, is just the initial part of it. It's just point A, where you assess your resources and then you look for different sources of financing, and if there are fiscal issues. So that's that to me is the journey that basically has to be on the table or in view for a demand of resources. So going one by one, if you DFIs are also in a very competitive environment. You've got different players coming in. AIIB also, and is an infrastructure bank. So it's very, the environment is quite competitive. And then you have, as I said, client has a responsibility to the demand. And we can talk about that later on. I'm just going through some of the key points. Excuse me. Foreign assistance, of course, is not just about financial transfers. It's also about knowledge, know-how, and that's where the value is, because we are the kind of economy that we are these days. There's a lot of value and premium on the knowledge that DFIs can bring to the table, and simply because these are multilateral organizations, and going. Just talking about multilaterals a bit, because multilaterals, Pakistan has a claim because Pakistan is a member of these organizations. So knowledge is where the real value is. How much of it is actually leveraged is a discussion point. And then you have that's the bit on the resources, right? And then the capability, as Dr. Fahim mentioned, that you have a bit about people going abroad and getting educated, master's degrees and PhDs and then so on, and they don't have much incentive to continue. So I myself am one. So, but I did fulfill the requirements of my education back then. After that, I joined. But from a very capacity standpoint, I mean, capacity is a word that is oft used sometimes even without actually analyzing it. For me, I think I would really think that a very empowered bureaucracy and an enabled one is something that it can really help implementation and execution. I was reading somewhere, and it was on a magazine, and they said, the COVID-19 has really exposed the ability in many places for people who can just, the capacity being non-existent in the sense that having people standing on ground and just delivering what was needed, because project management tends to be very complex. So from that standpoint, I think all of the successful projects, if you see delivered in Pakistan, I have a nagging doubt that you'll find a civil servant there somewhere. And then you have, from a capacity standpoint, how do you engage the private sector? That's a big question. And I was looking at one of the latest news, and one of the ladies I think she was from UBL, and she's been appointed as Deputy Governor, State Bank. And social media was all a buzz about her pays and benefits, which wasn't much. Most people would not think that they are too high, but we have a certain attitude towards this kind of news, and it generates a buzz. So how do we engage the private sector? How can we have public-private partnerships which can leverage private sector capital and so on? And leveraging private sector capital, let me apologize, private sector talent. I think that's the key. We have recently had people who come into the government and then they leave. There are many different factors around it, and whether the government is able to pay them well is just one. Then you have on the capacity side, and that's where my views are very strong, that you need to have a strong data-driven planning and execution. For example, do we know what we know, or do we know what we have? Does the government have, for example, this is a discussion that we keep having, at times formally and informally, the talent that the government has. Do we have an inventory of that? If we wanted to have 10 project managers tomorrow, do we have project directors? As I said, behind a successful project, you'll always find a good PD and a good team. So that's the capacity bit. And on the third one, if the direction you need to have, it might be a public policy issue, as Dr. Saab was also mentioning, and Fahim also mentioned. So it is a strategic consensus on what's the direction, because it sets the purpose and intent, and everything flows back from there. So and your planning and reflection, of course, then has to be data driven. We live in an age of data. Everything has to be empiricalized, because that saves money, and that promises good insights which feed into what you do next, because it's a circle of planning and execution and implementation. So what you do next has to be informed by what you have learned. So learning is a function of the data and empirical evidence that we have, and it's the insights would come at the interface of human intelligence, and where the systems which are running the data analytics for you can give you that data, and you can run those insights, and you can make them available to people who are into planning and who are designing projects and so on. So that is the explanation on the journey that I mentioned from point A to point B. Otherwise, it's very easy for anyone to just maybe mention PC1 issues and have, use country systems, for example, we've been saying this, that we want to achieve 100% literacy since long, and but we haven't been able to do that. So that is that policies have to be very rational and have to be well informed by data and the information that you get from it. It's very simplistic to say that you need capacity building in project management. I mean, there has to be capacity on the part of people who are actually looking at the people that they need to hire. And because that the capacity on the side of people who are assessing talent is extremely important, because once you see a good thing, you should know that it's a good thing. So that's also very, very important. So there then question of best practices, and the DFIs are very good at bringing in best practices and lessons learned from other markets. Obviously, we need to see if a project or a concept has done very well around the world in other countries, in comparable countries. I mean, China is also a recipient of the aid, so it's or financing. So it's and one can mention other countries also, Israel and Egypt also. So that there are different case studies. So some of these one can always mention, and harmonization on federal and provincial systems and so on. This is again a systems issue and a process issue, and that can always be improved. So what I'll do is I'll probably stop here with with just an example, because there is a presidential hackathon that takes place in Taiwan every year, and it took place in 2019. I'm thinking this year it might be delayed, or they may do it virtually. So what they do is they run a hackathon just to bring open data, innovative data users, and they bring the problems of national development and social needs to that hackathon to collectivize the wisdom and experts from across the government, industry, private sector, and civil society. So that means that essentially what they're doing is, they're hacking the public policy. They're bringing technology and the human intelligence together in a room to assess problems and come up with interesting solutions. And that so much wisdom in the room and data, I think, is bound to come up with something rather than hitting a wall. So and then it also brings ownership to the whole thing down the line. How much public policy evaluations we have in this country is also a question that I would like to ask, generally, if anyone can answer that. So that's, I think, objective basis of actually bringing views to the table is very, very important. And then on the hackathon, what they do is that they have it's supported by the president's office and at the highest level of support. So that's how they do it. Maybe they're a small country, they're able to do it, but it's an interesting case study. So I'll just let that sink in for now, and looking forward to closing remarks, and in between, if there are questions, we'll be very happy to address some of the questions that based on what I've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasrullah Millana Saab. It was very good. I think you made a good analysis. But the issue of capacity, I mean, Dr. Waqar, you also raised that, Nasrullah Millana also raises that. 75 years later, 200 universities, and Waqar Saab, we still don't have capacity. What is wrong? Where is capacity fallen? And World Bank has given HEC many good evaluations, so we must be doing something right. Nasrullah Millana Saab, there are no evaluations, but there are evaluations. The World Bank gives HEC a great evaluation, gives BISP a great evaluation, but where is our capacity then, Waqar Saab? Dr. Waqar, mic mute kar le, mic unmute.
Nazeem, I was saying that we have to look at a much broader perspective. The period that I noted for a transformation, which is the post-1989, unfortunately happened to be a period in which business and politics mixed up big time. And our values, so to say, then started deteriorating. And the early phase, well, you can say that it was there all along. But I feel that the role of business in politics was never like it started to be back in that arena. There was a break during Musharraf's time, but there also eventually businesses had a, and many will say that this was very positive, but mixing government and politics is always an extremely risky business. And so what has happened that if business is deciding key policies sitting in ECC, you have sat there with us, both of us have sat together. And you have seen if a policy on sugar is formulated or wheat is formulated. I mean, the very people who will go out and do those things, even when some people would recuse themselves from sitting there, but their very presence all around would mean that decisions will be taken by people with conflicted interests. So then these services, I mean, particularly I think PPP and PMLN and to a large extent KYO also. I was just reading a post from a service group where they said that all the bureaucracy was eventually converted into groups having interests or loyalties with one set of political party or political masters than other. So merit started being compromised. And the civil servants who are in at least law supposed to be implementing policies, they owed their presence in an important job to the continued liking by the political masters. And it's not that they were citadel of honesty, integrity. Their interest may have also gone in that direction. So they may have mixed up with them. And the result is that there is no merit that is left in the system. And Nadeem, this is easier said than understood and cured. Well, I mean, nations, if you study how great nations have failed, they have primarily failed. I mean, I was reading the history of Mamluks, and the Mamluks were great masters so long as their academies were producing the administrators and warriors completely on the basis of merit. And in the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, this is what was. So of the reasons of Ottoman demise, one was that the academies were tempered with, the selection process was tempered with, and people were not selected on the basis of merit. And I mean, I need not add more, Nadeem, to this malice that continues to afflict our I mean, social body, societal body, our national body.
Great, great. Thank you. Let me bring in another couple of people who might shed some light on it. Harun Sharif, who has some experience of donor agencies, has worked with them a lot in World Bank, DFID, etc., etc. He wanted to give some perspectives. Harun Saab. After that, I'll call Samia Altaf, who's also written a book on this thing. Harun, are you there?
Gee, I'm there, and I think unmuted.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
It's a very, very interesting debate. Once again, congratulations to PIDE and you for the leadership role and the speakers who have given different angles. I will be brief, but I have some experience of doing this business from both sides. I will start with two small discussions I have had. So one was a discussion several years back with my professor, Magnet Desai at London School of Economics, when I was talking to him that what kind of career I should choose, and obviously being a student of development and economics. So I said, how about joining, a multilateral organizations? So he smiled and he basically said that the kind of overheads these guys basically waste, if you just throw that money through a helicopter, you will be able to reduce poverty. Now, at that point in time, I did not understand. So I think one of the areas which needs to be highlighted is the cost, not only transaction cost, but the financial cost of delivering development loans and grants. It is huge, and still it's very much colonial mindset where foreign consultants are paid 3 times more than local consultants. That answers, Nadeem, your question that why local capacity is not being built, because obviously it's in the case of grant, it's taxpayers' money of a government and they have to create jobs for their people.
Right.
Second is actually the local side of it, and that's the current political regime before they came into power. And they had, a similar session where I was invited. And both our current Prime Minister and the former Finance Minister were part of that session. And they asked me this question that, why international organizations give money for things like governance, for things like nutrition, for things like, social sector development, particularly the multilateral banks. And they wanted to understand that. And at that point in time, they were running one province and their consensus was that they should only borrow money for the projects which have commercial returns to pay back. And that is a point I'm trying to link with what Dr. Waqar Masood was saying, the shift of donors towards policy lending. So what happens is that in policy lending is a lot more easier than targeted sector or project financing because you can give large sums in the budget of the government and it yields huge results in terms of influence, in terms of tinkering with policy, in terms of actually, winning lots of commercial contracts for their people. So this is where the thinking of the recipient country comes in. Several countries basically don't get into policy lending because policy is something which national government should drive. To answer Nadeemul Haq's early question that why do donors do it? If you take the policy lending out of the equation, then donors will have much little space to actually engage on policy. The ironic part is that donors engage with the policy, but under their system, they don't want to take any responsibility of that engagement if that policy fails. And I give you an example, some 22 years back, I was leading one of the largest capital market development program in Securities and Exchange Commission. So I was, ticking all the boxes for Asian Development Bank and all my colleagues who from ADB, they were getting their promotions. But at the end of the day, there's no evaluation that, did we really manage to make a capital market which is fulfilling the needs of the country and are they accountable or not? So accountability is a serious question, particularly in the multilateral banks, where the heads of these banks are not appointed on merit. So how can you actually preach accountability and governance to a country where, as a matter of fact, you are appointed based on a lobby of your sponsors and you are, expected to promote certain interests of those countries. I would also like to comment on the missing nexus which I saw between the research, some of the very good research which international organizations do, and the people which we call the task leads who are responsible for disbursing money. Actually, there is a very clear disconnect within the organization to use the research which they do. They are only there, promotion depends on disbursements. So there is a very, very, clear conflict of interest within the organizations there. Now that the landscape is changing and we are getting a lot more regional institutions coming into play and bilateral countries, I will make only two comments which are linked to Pakistan. The first of all is that Pakistan needs to very carefully think about a model of external financing because it is not only the capacity, it's a political economy question. We like to, give space to others to play in our turf. We need to take ownership of this whole aid business and development assistance business, whether it is Western or it is China, or recently I was part of those negotiations with the Middle Eastern countries where we went for some injection of capital, which you saw 2 days back, Pakistan had to repay $1 billion to Saudi Arabia. There is a price for taking money for your budget sport. And that I kept on advocating, whether it is China, whether it is Saudi Arabia, whether it is Qatar, whether it is UAE, whoever puts in money in your budget, Pakistan has been a proxy country for huge geopolitical alignments, and they will ask for it at the right time. It is being naive that we think that people are very friendly and they are giving you these Eid gifts or something. So we haven't really thought through that the goodies we are asking for short-term fixes, the political cost of these goodies could be so high that which could outweigh the money we borrow from multilateral institutions, as a matter of fact. So I think that I actually worry about our thinking of just taking money. And what happened was that some of these countries I'm still engaged with, having left the cabinet, they now really think that Pakistan only wanted that money rather than looking at a meaningful economic partnership, because we never followed up on the other front. We got the money, we came back. So as a matter of fact, there's a major loss of face on Pakistan. In China, I was the lead on industrial cooperation on CPEC. I'm still advising China through Beijing University and NDRC. There is a very profound change happening in China towards financing bilateral partners. And I think there will be a lot more private sector banking role in future after the COVID-19 and the shrinking of Chinese economy. So we got to see very clearly a fiscal forecasting model for Pakistan before getting into, I very clearly see a trend towards fast tracking infrastructure projects under CPEC, but we do not have a model of macro fiscal forecasting to deal with those kind of inflows. So in summary, what I would say is that I have never seen a country growing on external flows or external ideas. And that is something Pakistani politicians have to understand. That is something Pakistani bureaucrats have to understand. What happens is that we have opened up so much space that all kind of people, it actually is scary when I see the quality of advice which is given often to Pakistan. And something was mentioned about the transaction cost. I wouldn't name one of my friend who is now vice president in a multilateral bank. He called me that he was in Pakistan and he wanted to see the Prime Minister. So I asked him that, why do you want to see the Prime Minister? So he thought for a while and he said, I'm in Pakistan, I think I should call on the Prime Minister. So I said, is there something important you need to talk to him? What would you offer on table other than a cup of tea? He thought for a while, but he said, there's a tradition that I should meet the Prime Minister. So I will rest my case here. And that gentleman is not too happy with me that I did not send a message to the Prime Minister. So all I'm trying to say is that in the past we have been, and even myself, I was a senior official, in bilateral and multilateral system. But being a Pakistani, I had an edge that I had, social access to people. But when I worked in India, I worked in, Dhaka, I worked in 16 countries. Even Central Asian countries don't open up policy space to the tune which we have done. And I think a lot to do here is with the colonial mindset, that we really think that somebody, with a white skin, he comes here or she comes here and they will start advising us on anything. Final comment what Dr. Waqar Masood mentioned about this company called Karandaz. I would only raise two questions. It is like a private equity fund, and I recently looked at its books because I was the one who actually gave this idea to Commonwealth Development Corporation to set up an equity fund in Pakistan. There was a very clear, market failure in Pakistan for, SMEs kind of financing. My question to my colleagues in the government and donors is that why a financial institution which has a balance sheet of almost 13 billion rupees now, private equities, why it is being run in an unregulated NGO space? I would rest the case if you open up their website and look at their board members. And their board members, some of them actually are sitting in your cabinet. So my point here is that we open up space ourselves, an informal sector of a foreign funded organization. So it is the fault lies with us that where is our regulatory capacity? Why have we permitted? Would you permit another NGO to do a business of 13 billion rupees of financial sector interventions and crowd out the market? So question lies with Pakistan, it's a private equity fund, it's not an aid agency, but it needs to be regulated. So these are few thoughts. I tried a lot, Nadeem, to put in, Pakistani outfits in front when I was on the other side. And some examples are Punjab Skills Development Fund I created through aid, then government took over. IGC, your favorite institution. What I would like to say is that when it was being created with Masood Ahmed and Andrew Steers and myself and others, the idea was not that this institution gets captured by a few in private space and become a consulting house. The idea was that generate an institution in slums in Pakistan which provides quality advice to the government. So the question is that government never basically used that thing and opened up space that it got captured. And I can go on and on. I tried several of these initiatives where private institution in Pakistan could actually deliver quality advice rather than the consultants and contractors who are just business people there to make money. So that's the landscape, but I have three suggestions to close. Number one, Pakistan should very seriously review our policy of policy lending from international organizations. We need to very seriously think the sectors which required ideas and money from concessional lending and grants. Grants are dying anyways. It will be concessional lending in future. We need to understand the influencing part of this business, which we don't get it. And also look at the commercial enterprise, which is linked to this whole business of grants and loans. If you come to think of it, multilaterals actually give the largest loans for commercial enterprise and dams and roads and contracting. So we need to see that, how that thing is helping, whom. And that is where I rest my case. I think the ball is in Pakistan's court, that how we want to use these institutions prudently, and what are the areas which should have a red line, and what are the areas, and technical assistance should stop, frankly speaking. I would be very, very candid here that, I have been, part of the crime giving large sums of technical assistance. It has negative returns. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harun, and thank you for doing a mea culpa. You're absolutely right. You're responsible for much, as I keep reminding you. You not only set up Karandaz, you also put up a housing unit in the central bank, where central bank has nothing to do with housing. You also put up a small and medium unit in the central bank, whereas the central bank,
we can have separate discussion. Go on.
So my point is that donors can put up units wherever they like without any reason. Central bank, the IMF says, needs an independence law. And we give them an independence law, and then central bank wants to become the planning commission, and we don't even notice it. At the same time, things like PPF have been around for 50 years, and I don't know what they're doing, because quite frankly, they have a lot of money, but nothing seems to happen. So I'll leave it there. Let's go on. Samia Altaf has written a book called So Much Aid, So Little Development. So Samia, why do you think there is a problem, or is there no problem? Am I wrong? Samia, quickly.
You are absolutely right, Nadeem. There are many problems. And actually, you know, your panelists have done a very good job of looking at different aspects of it. My very special thanks go to Mr. Fahim Khan, who has really pulled together all the numbers and all the data and presented it in a very succinct fashion. And of course, listening to Mr. Waqar Masood is always a privilege, very rare privilege. And thanks also to Mr. Nasir Mia and Mr. Harun Sharif. I have a couple of comments about each of the panelists' presentation. And then I have a question, I guess, for everybody and for you, you know, people who have been involved with the government for a long time. My comments are that, you know, there seems to be a little bit of bafflement about how is it possible that the donors, you know, can get away with doing this, that, and the other. And of course, how is it possible that they bring all these missions? And how is it possible that, you know, they bring in their own people for technical assistance, whereas we have in the country all these institutions and of course, you know, people who can provide technical assistance. I mean, it is possible because we make it possible. To my understanding, the bilateral assistance comes into the country based on a strategic agreement that the EID signs with the donor agency to say, yes, we will allow you to come in and we will allow your partners to come in and to do this work for us. And so they sign that agreement. So they know within the in USAID, it's called a strategic grant plan agreement. Within that agreement, the donor agency actually, according to its regulations, lays out that, you know, a certain percentage of the grant will go back as technical assistance to its own contractors, because that is part of their regulation, because it is taxpayers' money. So any business that is generated from US taxpayers' money, the first dibs rests with US citizens. So that is part of the regulation and the government agrees on that. When you sign that agreement, you agree on that. So they are promoting their own people, so to speak, because that is part of their strategic agreement. Number two, you know, when we say, how can we allow them to make these projects and how can we allow them to you know, make these decisions? Again, it seems to me a little bit surprising that, again, we have allowed them, the government of Pakistan has allowed them to do all of that, because you recall that, and I recall very clearly, I was working with USAID when USAID also, for the first time, bypassed the government and started to work directly with local NGOs. And that opened the floodgates for DFID and for Japanese, for everybody to start working with local NGOs. That happened, I think, in 2003 or 2004. And the first NGO that got, I think, 5 million or 6 million to do work in education was an NGO that was owned jointly by the then minister, I think, or member of the National Assembly, Daniel Aziz, and his wife. And that was a permission granted by the government. It was a permission granted by EAD that USAID and the other donors could work directly with the NGOs. So I just feel, and I think that Mr. Sharif kind of summed it up very well when he said that the fault lies with us and not in the donors. So you know, the comment that Mr. Mia made, I find that also a little bit perplexing, that this system is too large to understand it and encompass it fully and to understand it and do something about it. I disagree with that. I mean, what is the job of the government if not that to understand what the the development assistance is and how to bring it about in such a fashion that it is to the benefit of the country. And as Mr. Mia said very rightly, that there are examples of other countries, for example, you take Malaysia or South Korea, and even China itself, that has used donor assistance or development assistance very, very effectively. And there are very clear indicators as to why they have been able to use it effectively and why we haven't been able to use it effectively. So I think it's to kind of be overwhelmed by this, that the system is too complex and the system is too large and there are too many players and there are too many pieces. I think that is not correct. I think that we really need to understand the system. It is not too large, it is not too complex, it has many pieces, it is large, it is complex, but that is exactly the job of the government representatives to do that. I quite agree with Mr. Sharif that human beings are the ones who are within these large organizations and who manage them on a day-to-day basis. And if you read my book is, I repeat this again and again, that their personal incentives are very, very critical in terms of what decisions they make on a daily basis. And Mr. Sharif has also mentioned that most of these people who are part of the mid-level donor management, World Bank or USAID or DFID, most of these people are evaluated on the basis of the fact that they were able to disperse the money within Pakistan that they brought in there, and they were able to do it in a particular time frame. And that time frame basically is within the fiscal year of the donor country. When I was working with managing USAID's money, the assistance to government of Pakistan, our bugaboo basically was this, that, oh, the pipeline is bulging and the pipeline has to be emptied and the pipeline, and no matter how much you reassured them and said, okay, we will empty out the pipeline, but no, it had to be emptied out at a particular rate and during a particular time period. So yes, that is what these managers, mid-level managers, are evaluated on, and so that is what they do. The incentives of the government officials are also aligned in such a fashion that, it is also to their benefit to, I use the word kind of pretend with a little bit tongue in cheek, and not entirely tongue in cheek, but to pretend that, this is fine and this is okay, or we are helpless, or humse to kuch ho nahi sakta. I just feel that if the government wants to build its capacity, it has the authority to do so. Let me give you a little story to illustrate that. When USAID was offering assistance for a study tour to senior government officials to manage an HIV/AIDS program that we were funding. We were giving, I think, $12 million or $15 million for that. And it had funding also for 6 senior government officials to travel to, God knows, Finland or someplace, or to Harvard or someplace for 3 months for a study tour. And I held on to the money because I was the one making the decision at that time. I held on to the money and I said that we will fund this trip only if the government promises us that once these officers come back, they will stay in the Department of Health project management units, in the HIV project management units, at least for a year. Because on record, I could see that almost 60% of them were due for a promotion or were due to leave. I mean, how difficult it is for the government to change the regulation and say, yes, we will do that. Why would, and the government, I don't want to name the officials would come back and say that, this can't be done because it's a question of their career. These are, government officials, they are DMG group or whatever that is. So they will move on as it is. But you couldn't send anybody else either because these were the people who were the heads of the unit. So I bring this back again to say that,
we have to finish. So
I'm just going to finish. So my question is, so these are again, things that everybody knows. My question is that all of these regulations the government of Pakistan makes, all of the strategic grant agreements that it signs, the government signs, EAD signs. So how difficult it is for them to undo those, or how difficult it is for them to come up with new regulations? So that is the question I leave the forum for. With.
Much. Two quick questions. इसके बाद I'll go to the panelists. Shahid Wahid Saab, quickly, बोलिए.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shahid Wahid and I'm a research scholar from Applied Research Center. Sir, my question is about the aid, those aid which is given only for enhancing export of developing countries. I worked on this topic in the context of Pakistan, but find very different results, different results from different sectors. In those sectors where donor countries have more benefits, they give aid to those sectors.
Okay.
In the form of PIDE aid, which decrease our export to those donor countries and increase import from those donor countries. मतलब वहाँ से import हमारे increase हो रहे और हमारे export उन countries को बढ़ नहीं रहे. My question is from Dr. Waqar Ahmed that is it possible to stop this PIDE aid or convert this PIDE aid to untied aid without condition? Thank you.
Farah Nizamani, last question. Comment, boliye. Sir, are you there?
Hello, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, my name is Sarah. I am a research scholar at Applied Economics Research Center. Sir, I would like to say that if you look at the third world countries, all of them have one thing in common, and that is foreign aid. But if you look at who's actually solving the issues in the society, it is not the government or the aid. For example, Karachi had this transportation issue since decades, but now Uber, Careem, and these different innovative ideas, they are solving the transportation issues. So basically, it's technology and innovative business models which are saving the day. So why don't donors, sir, push the creation of these practical, innovative ideas if they have so much money and influence, instead of giving food and educational books, sir? And sir, if I might get the answer that they do, like the FID had given this amount of money to State Bank for entrepreneurship. So my own father, I come from a small scale farming family, and he has this excellent working business model, something like fintech, and not something as ineffective as microfinance. So after staying 5 years, the money staying 5 years for State Bank, it just went to Karandas, and he just could not access it. I would want comment on this, sir. Thank you.
That's Haroon Sharif, so don't worry. Okay, Ji, let's go to the panelists. Waqar Masood Sab, if you're still there with us, you can, your last words, but before you do that, I'd also like to ask you a question. What does EAD do? Does EAD have control over the aid process or not? And secondly, should the EAD be in charge of aid, or should it be planning? Or is there a dichotomy in our system that the planners are doing something and foreign aid is doing something else? So Waqar Sab, over to you. Your last comments on everything.
Thank you, Nadeem. Look, an individual division does not have the larger authority to make policy decisions at its own. When there is a clear conflict with the other country, development partner, you then are kind of stuck. They had a deliberate policy that they will not give the money through the government, and despite having several serious conversations with US authorities, it turned out that they in turn had a significant influence of the Congress, which kind of forced them, or they used with a combination of a polite and an agenda. The agenda was that, they wanted to use the money to have access to Pakistan society and do things their way through their choice consultants and distribute money amongst people who they feel will be kind of, sort of helpful to them in return on a one-on-one basis. I mean, I think there is no, you cannot take exception to a development partner's desire that its contributions should be appreciated in the country, but it is the via media. I mean, should it through the government or through their own chosen local residents? And I think no government should allow that anybody has the permission, as Samia is saying. Frankly, I mean, this was a very, very important contention and differences of opinion. I mean, whoever was in EAD, I partly was there. I could not have taken this matter. I mean, I could have brought it to the attention of our principals, but they were the final. I mean, the idea. Also, let me share. When Mr. Bush announced a policy of supporting Musharraf after his February 2002 visit, they announced $3 billion aid over a 5-year period. And they said 50% it would be military, 50% economic. I mean, Musharraf Saab said that I don't need that any of those military thing. All of it has to go for economic and social sectors. But he was bluntly told that no, I mean, it would be like this. So this is how it is supported. So he could not have, in return, told them that, look, okay, so keep your money to yourself and we'll live without it. Some other comments have come, and frankly, I mean, we are a country which is, in a way, after 73 years, continues to search for its moorings. Some nationalistic point of view, some ideological thing, whatever you want to say those. I mean, a national pride in doing some things. I mean, we are not very committed to some national values, and very justifiably so, because we have been consistently disappointed by our political leaders. Now, I think this partly answers the question of the gentleman from AERC about tied and untied thing. There is tied, and if there is there's nothing which is untied. And again, one of the comments has already been made. I mean, these are our own choices. These are all our own choices. We are making these decisions. We go for seeking such assistance, and it's all because of our own failure. And we continue to pay price. So this is a spiral. Somebody sometime may say that it is not acceptable and break the chains. So let's hope for a savior in that sense until then. Thank you, Nadeem. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Very kind of you to join us. Thank you. Nasser Saab, can I impose on you? You are an ex-civil servant who went to the to ADB, and lots of young civil servants are doing it. And I think ADB has more economists than the PIDE. World Bank has certainly more economists than the PIDE, and certainly more than the Planning Commission, Ministry of Finance, and the Commerce put together. Nasser Saab, how would you comment on this? And the second thing that's also very important is, which somebody else has also raised, that local consultants are paid half the rate that foreign consultants are. This discrimination takes place against us in our own country. Nasser Saab?
Thank you, Dr. Saab. It was very interesting to listen to the views, and particularly Dr. Samia. Enjoyed her feedback. Dr. Saab always has a pleasure whenever he's speaking. It's always great to listen to him. Some of the policies I don't have good information. I'm sure there is a profile rating. The last question that you mentioned, but I can also show you examples of local consultants who are being paid very, very well. So that's, but that if you like, we can discuss it offline also. Okay. But generally, if you, I take it that these are my concluding comments, Dr. Saab, is it so? So it's what I normally, what I do is, I would take a very, that's what I normally do. I would take a very hand-lens razor view of things, sometimes, whatever, because as Goethe said, you can have a, you can attribute many things to simple misunderstanding and inability to understand things, rather than attributing, motives which are not so clear, or let's say if you go by social media insinuations, malicious or wicked, which may not be the case. But by interesting point that Dr. Samia made, that it's on decision making, and I'll go back to the journey that I mentioned. Data informed intelligence and insights can improve decision making, and that's the thing that I will continuously talk about, as much as I'm able to, because essentially, I mean, you need to have a look at, because you will have unpacked or uncomplexized the question of development assistance or its outcomes if you have unpacked the public policy formulation process. So partly that would answer a lot of questions that we have had or we have discussed today. So that the public policy process has to be more streamlined, and then you can trust the process to deliver. And this works for everything. For example, you can talk about civil service reforms. You said I was an ex-civil servant. I'm happy to be. Civil service has given me a lot. I've learned a lot. But then I did not join ADB straight off from civil service. I went on to work with the corporate sector, and I worked with very good names, very good tech companies. And that has added to what I know. And it's a pleasure to actually look at things and be able to connect those dots. So I think the reliance on data can improve the situation you're planning before you start going into a resource assessment, fiscal assessment of things. If you have a streamlined public policy process that relies on empirical evidence and informs priority that set the direction. And that also entails broad-based consultation, and that is always a challenge. Whenever we have, ADB does country diagnostic studies, for example, and it's very difficult to get the right people in the room at times to actually come and at the table and contribute. That's the most challenge. That's the biggest challenge I have noticed. So that data allows you to plan all the 4 steps on that journey. From resources to capacity to direction and reflection. Reflection is very, very important. I'll just quote an interesting story from the past. In the Olympics of the 2000, the British rowing team had 8 gentlemen in that rowing team. They decided that they're going to adopt a simple approach. If they were to win the rowing race, they said, they set up a razor of sorts. They said, if whatever we do, we have to measure it against just one simple principle. And they called it, in quote unquote, they said, will it make the boat go faster? So everything, whether they want to go to shopping or they want to go to the pub, no. Will it make the boat go faster? No. They decided it in 1998, and lo and behold, they won it in 2000 in Sydney. That's something very, very, they just did it in 2 years, and they never won before. So that's the kind of missionary understanding that and then Dr. Samia mentioned it very, very well, and I said this is the realization, reflection that actually all stakeholders need to take to actually unpack it and understand it a little bit more. So whatever happens, some of the critical things that you easy or whatever, it's a cliched thing to call these low-hanging fruits. But everything that comes in foreign currency is a requirement, as you will understand. I'm not an economist, but that's my understanding. You understand that you can't, for example, build a dam say, for example, crowdsourcing is a great thing. I'm a fan of that. We should crowdsource many things, not just money. We should crowdsource intelligence and opinion also. And that's a great thing to do. But there is a foreign currency element in it. So you have to see, I mean, that's the razor that one can have, is if it is improving domestic productivity, and infrastructure does that, energy does that. So it's only a question of prioritizing these things and enabling the capacity on behalf of, for the people, for the organizations and the institutions to actually absorb that and deliver it and get the economic returns, not just the financial returns, but economic returns out of that investment. I think that's a responsibility consciously that everybody needs to understand. And I assure you, we take these things very seriously, wherever. So, and then you have ease of doing business, as you very rightly mentioned, that's a regulatory apparatus that needs to actually establish and let these projects and the project delivery units to move forward and deliver the projects. Project management also, that's again the capacities. I will not talk much about it, but then we have good examples also in Nadra. I always like to talk about motorway police. They set up, they're the same people, but they set up the processes and they're doing very, very, very fine, mashallah. And on the lastly, again, going back to the same subject that's very close to my heart, we need to invest in learning. And that I believe it will connect with what you have been saying and what you've written in your book, that it has to come from local research, that they have a responsibility also to come up with empirical information to enable that decision making that builds the capacity. At the end of the day, it is people who actually carry these projects forward. Rest of the team can only contribute. So we look for the competitive advantage, and agriculture might be the easiest low-hanging fruit. In Israel, for example, there are 70 companies which are making tools for drones, analyzing, monitoring, and automating agriculture, digitizing agriculture. I think I take pleasure in informing the House that currently we are working on a digital agriculture concept in Punjab, and we have excellent set of projects in Punjab in the irrigation area. So it's a question of looking for that competitive advantage. Maybe we need to invest in TVET also that supports the agriculture sector. So that also is something that helps improving local productivity and coming to a situation where you are exporting these things and there is a steady supply of foreign currency exchange. So it's all about sitting down and unpacking the whole thing, unpacking the public policy formulation process, prioritizing, thinking, reflecting, but aiming at one thing, which is again, I'll refer to your book and what the World Bank actually, as you said, may have taken the concept, is actually how do we enable the country to evolve for the long term. I call it long-term evolution. What is on the horizon? What is it that we need to look for? I mean, that's an endeavor and hope, if I may say so. So that this is where I'll probably conclude this. That's where I feel everything that in this chain actually it will benefit from investment in data and learning and processizing the whole thing. If you processize and you break it down into simpler things, you understand it better. That's what I do, and that's my learning. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nasser Sahab. Very kind of you. I think you raised some very interesting points that we need data, reflection, prioritization, and learning, right, and maximizing our rates of return. As far as I can see, all those things require research. All those things require thinking. And we are a country that has outsourced our thinking and our best people to donors. Would you run your household by letting somebody else take all your decisions? This is what Pakistan has done. We have outsourced our thinking. And PIDE, which is supposed to be a premier think tank in Pakistan, has been demolished in the process. PIDE used to be a leading think tank in the developing world. Ever since donors have come up, this is a study that now Fahim Jahangir, I'll ask him to do now, how PIDE and our university is being decimated by the donors. And to make that point, let me tell you, Nasser Sahab, please go tell the donors. Today, not a single donor agency, in fact, we do so many webinars, no donor agency comes to listen to us. Where do they learn? How do they learn? Fahim, can you comment on that? Are the donors, they tell us to learn, are they a learning organization? Can they learn without listening to people like us? Or are they saying data only exists outside us? We are not a part of the data. I find that very strange. So go ahead. Fahim Saab, your turn.
I think, Dr. Nadeem, with all these discussions which we are having there is one important thing which we need to understand, and that is the interdependence. The interdependence of the government of Pakistan on donors and on their resources, and at the same time, the interdependence and dependence of donors and their interest to operate in Pakistan. So that is very important to understand. If you look at the resources which government or the donors, the development partners carry, one of the resource which is very important is the knowledge resource they manage. The World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the DFID, USAID, they consciously, with all the effort and funds, they manage, they fund, they invest, and they conduct research to manage their own resource, their own knowledge resource, their own evidence-based, things, so that they can influence the government policies while presenting their research conducted perhaps in other country or something. So you are right in a way that they do not always look for local consultants to conduct a research, but as Nasser was mentioning, there are not many, but few examples where consultants are actually engaged with the donors and they are conducting studies. But I completely agree, they perhaps do not engage the local think tanks, especially think tank like PIDE, to conduct studies for them. There is, like Dr. Sami Altaf was mentioning, there is a strategic agreement whenever they have grant element, that certain amount of money, that certain amount of grant will go back to their country. And that includes the tide aid, which includes any equipment you need or any consultant you need or something. So that's basically the complexity we are talking about this. And yes, we can talk about it. We can pressurize them. We can reject their studies. We can reject their findings, and we can try to convince them to conduct local studies here. But that's more debatable. That's not something like we can just say they would agree to it. It's very difficult to actually convince them to not bringing their own consultants to Pakistan and give that funds and money to consultants and researchers in Pakistan, which we have. So yes, I was saying we have requirements, we have dependence, and they have interest. But what the point I would like to make here is, it's already like 2 hours, that there is no need to kill each other. The government and the development partners both. I think we need to learn to survive together, to live together, to flourish together, to get benefit from each other, to get benefit from their presence. So it's very important to understand this. And for that, we need to understand the complexities, as Nasser also was saying, and I was saying, that we need to understand the policy processes, we need to understand the constraints, and we need to come up with a more, a clear engagement strategy that how to go along. We should stop taking dictation from the donors. We should stop listening and implementing their projects, which are mostly not relevant on the ground. We should build our own capacity. We should build our own cadre of specialists in every ministry. And we should have our think tanks, not only one PIDE in one Islamabad. In the corner of Islamabad, we have multiple think tanks. Look at India, look at Bangladesh, look at other regional countries. I'm not giving examples of countries in the West. Look at them. In only Bangladesh, they have more than 89, 90 think tanks over the period after the separation. Look at India, they have more than 190 think tanks, and they are like publishing like anything. They are contributing like anything. So there are so many things on our part which we need to do also. Then I think we will be able to actually influence. If we have something already in place and donors comes up with a report and says, look, we did this in Kenya and it's working, we will tell them, look, this we have in Pakistan and it's not working, or it's working. We will go by that. So it's also our part and their part. We need to learn and we need to
Thank you, Fahim sir. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. Great webinar, Fahim. Thank you very much. Fahim, now get down and do some serious work. Look, about 30 years ago, Ali Khan and I wrote a paper which is still available on the IMF website where we proved mathematically, empirically, everything that foreign consultants are worse than domestic people. And I think the donors should look at it. But the problem is, foreign aid is a system where we are considered as lab rats unless we stand up for ourselves. If an organization, a counterpart of PIDE, held a webinar in China or in Korea, all the donors would be there. You have to win the respect of your partners. We cannot win the respect of our partners by being slaves to them. We are basically lab rats. We give our data to them for them to analyze. We don't analyze it for ourselves. We don't think for ourselves. The fault is ours. I agree entirely. But the reason we are having these webinars is to create awareness. Perhaps our children, younger folks would rise up and stand for themselves and build the policy community necessary to reclaim our country. Because right now, let me put it this way, 1947 happened. We had a seminar with Gustav Papanek. We had a webinar with Marcus Daxel. You can see, we never gained independence idea-wise. Because from day one, Papanek and people like that have ruled us. Guys, claim your country back. Thank you very much. Wonderful webinar. We'll have another one tomorrow on the same subject on USAID with another PhD thesis by Hussain Nadeem tomorrow at 7 p.m. Join us, please. All the best. Thank you, folks. I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. Bye-bye.
Thank you.